feel slightly vindicated on this one. Not that it bothers me, but I did notice that my pre-fight prediction got more thumbs down than any other video I think I've ever made on YouTube, where I said that Kubrat Pulev wouldn't be able to hang with Klitschko. And I got a few comments saying I was badly underestimating Pulev, saying Pulev was going to win, lots of thumbs down. Truth is, I didn't see this one as a competitive fight, and Klitschko's dominance was clear throughout. I think there were 2 knockdowns in the first round. First one was a very good knockdown. Wladamir Klitschko, he throws a beautiful front hand left hook, very similar to the first knockdown in the Povetkin fight. It's almost a jab that he turns into a left hook, lands clean on Pulev, knocks him down. I did think at that stage the fight could be over. It really, I wouldn't have had complaints really if the ref had called the fight in the first round, because Pulev looked all over the place to my eyes. There was a second knockdown. It was unclear whether that was as a result of Pulev still being on quite unsteady legs and just being thrown to the ground by Vlad. Despite the excellent performance from Vlad, I think this has to go down as one of his better or best ever performances even. There was still a lot of holding. I think there was holding from the first 3 or 4 seconds of the fight. There was a lot of pushing, there was a lot of wrestling. He threw Pulev about quite a lot. It still was that kind of unfan-friendly performance where there was a lot of all of that going on, not the most sportsmanlike performance. And I think the second knockdown of the first round I'd largely attribute to that as opposed to a clean knockdown. There was another knockdown in the third round, and finally Klitschko finishes the fight in the 5th with another left uppercut. I mean, people think of Klitschko, people always say jab, 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 big right hand. And yes, he does have a mega right hand. But this sort of front hand left hook he throws, left hand lead, is absolutely devastating. I mean, Pulev was thrown right onto his back and was out, he was out all day. Referee started the count and then waved it off because it was clear the guy was in no man's land. Vlad won every round of the fight convincingly. Complete and utter dominance. Pulev isn't someone with a suspect chin before tonight, and I don't think we should say he's got a suspect chin now. Klitschko genuinely is one of the biggest punchers in the sport, and to get the knockout successes he has against the level of opposition he has, maybe I'd go as far to say as he's the biggest puncher in the heavyweight division. I know people like David Price and Deontay Wilder look devastating, but they're not fighting the same level of opposition Klitschko has, and it may be that this guy actually hits harder than a lot of them. It was absolutely devastating in his performance in that way. Pulev had 1 or 2 elements of success. We know, despite being completely dominated, there was 1 or 2 slight glimpses. In the first minute or so of the fight, he lands a very heavy jab on Wladamir. Now, I thought at the time that jab had actually put Wladamir on a bit wobbly-legged. It seemed to catch Wladamir very clean and really have effect. I was surprised at that, and there was 1 or 2 moments where Pulev and his jab were effective. I also thought that Pulev was very upright, and with his height and with his upright stance, he looked slightly more awkward for Wladamir. Wladamir had to think his way in. He had to be a bit more patient at times than we saw in his fights against Povetkin and Leopai. He couldn't just jab their head off like he did against those shorter guys. So it does hark back to a point I made in the pre-fight video, that I do think a tall man with a jab does have the potential to beat Klitschko. But Pulev, slightly shorter, didn't quite have the reach. I know people mock Tyson Fury, but perhaps if Tyson Fury, with his longer reach, if he could pepper Wladamir with the jabs, if he could be taller than Pulev, perhaps that awkwardness could actually cause Wladamir some problems, and perhaps someone like Fury could try and stay out of range a bit more, because Pulev was kind of standing at 3/4 range. He was doing, this two-handed wobble thing, trying to feinting with the jabs, but what he was actually doing is leaving himself open. And because he was a slightly smaller man who jabs, he was standing in range with his hands, like this. And what that meant is he was imminently hittable. You were just waiting for Vlad to tee off with the next left-hand hook or right-hand cross. And it came, pretty imminently. I think Wladamir, once again, whenever the fight got in close, went to hold. Pulev's inside game was non-existent, and I'm just not really sure what Pulev's tactic to winning this fight was. I really don't get how he thought he was going to win here, because he was standing in perfect range for Vlad to hit him. He really was a sitting duck. And it just didn't make sense to me. Pulev's inside game was non-existent. We know he's not an inside fighter. Vlad was able to close him down. Pulev wasn't really trying to get out of range. He was just standing there, and it looked to me like it was only a matter of time. As I say, I really did think this fight could have ended in the first round. For me, and I've said this before, there's 3 ways to beat Wladamir Klitschko. Pulev was able to land on Klitschko tonight. If you had a massive puncher, and I don't consider Pulev to be a big puncher, if you had a David Haye or a Deontay Wilder, you've always got a chance, because we know Klitschko's chin isn't the most iron chin in the world. And if you've got guys who hit with that dynamite power, perhaps there's scope to get a KO. But Pulev didn't have that. You could have an inside game. You could be like a Mike Tyson style fighter, going berserk on his ribs, fighting in the inside, forcing your way in, fighting dirty when it comes to the holding side of things. But again, Pulev doesn't have that. Or you can out-jab Wladamir Klitschko, and in my eyes, Wladamir Klitschko's jab is so advanced, the only way you're going to do that is if you're a taller man, a rangier man, who can stand outside of Vlad's jab and use your own. Therefore, I'm not saying that Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder are necessarily superior fighters to Pulev, but I think styles make fights, and I think Deontay Wilder's power, David Haye's power, Bermane Stivern's power, and Tyson Fury's range and jab and distance means that these guys do have a higher chance of getting success against Klitschko than Pulev had tonight. Pulev brought what he usually brings to the table. He didn't bring anything different. He didn't step it up. He brought a one-dimensional jabbing game against the best jabber on the planet. As I say, there were times he caused awkwardness, but it was nothing more than that. It was a very, very dominant performance from Wladamir, one of his best ever. For me, Pulev was too hittable. He got his range wrong. He got his defence wrong. He got the tactics wrong. He didn't really have an appropriate game plan on how to beat Wladamir. A real dominant performance from Wladamir. The only negative point, as I say, from the first few seconds there was holding. The referee was effective in breaking up the holding very quickly, but he did nothing to stop the holding. There was no threat to take a point. There was no, harsh words with Klitschko. He was stopping the holding from sort of ensuing, but from continuing, should I say, but he wasn't stopping the holding from starting. And I think, referees in future are going to need to take a firmer stance. As for Klitschko, to me, the guy's last few performances, Povetkin, Leopai, Pulev, I know they don't please some boxing fans, but to me the guy is a man absolutely still in his peak, performing as dominantly as ever, and it was a clinical performance tonight. I'm interested to hear people's thoughts on this. To all the Pulev fans who commented outraged at my initial pre-fight prediction, let's hear from you now. Thanks for watching.